We are forgotten. That's what grocery workers are saying, and they're hoping for higher pay and vaccinations. It has been an exhausting 10 months for Tony Ward Stockwell, who's an assistant manager at a place called Cash Saver, which is a grocery chain in Guthrie, Oklahoma. She has been helping to oversee about 40 anxious employees during a deadly pandemic, vigilantly disinfecting counters at the store and worrying about passing the coronavirus to her elderly mother while dropping off produce. News of the vaccines initially boosted her spirits, but her optimism has faded as she learned that grocery store workers in Oklahoma would not be eligible for them until spring. Um, when when the state said that they were phase three, she just laughed it off, saying that she's like, I wanted to laugh stock. Well, 45 said we're around just as many sick people as we are around non-sick people, just like healthcare workers, because we are always going to be open to supply food to the public. Healthcare workers are heroes in my eyes, she added, but we are forgotten. The race to distribute vaccines and the emergence of more contagious variants of COVID-19 have put a renewed spotlight on the plight of grocery workers in the United States. The industry has boomed in the past year as Americans have stayed home and avoided restaurants, but in most cases, that has not translated into extra pay for its workers. After Long Beach, California mandated hazard pay for grocery workers, the grocery giant Kroger responded last week by saying it would close two locations. And now, even as experts warn people to minimize the time spent in grocery stores because of the new coronavirus variants, the New York Times found only 13 states that had they had started specifically vaccinating those workers. The grocery workers are known to have these very thin margins, which they do, but they have been very profitable during the pandemic," said Molly Kinder, who's a fellow at the Brookings Institution who has researched the retailers' pay during the pandemic. Employers, by and large, with only a few exceptions like Trader Joe's and Costco, ended hazard pay 2 months ago. Oh, or actually paid hazard. They ended hazard pay like months ago. Yeah, my hazard pay I think ended back in June, and it should have still been ongoing. Um, and the lady added, she added, if you look at how the virus has gone since then, it's so much more deadly now. Brookings found that while only 13 of the largest retail and grocery companies in the United States earned 17 billion more in the first 3 quarters of 2020 than they did a year later, they basically stopped offering the extra compensation to their associates in the early summer. At the same time, some opted to buy back shares and gave big sums to the executives. The tension is especially high on the West Coast, where cities like Los Angeles and Seattle have moved forward with mandates that require hazard pay for the essential grocery workers and are now facing threats of store closures and even an end to the food bank donations from grocers. Um, Bertha Ayala, who works at a Food for Less store in Long Beach, California, was ecstatic after the city enacted an ordinance last summer requiring her store, which is owned by Kroger, to pay its workers an additional $4 per hour of the hazard pay to compensate them for the risks that they face. Basically, I love my job, Ayala said, but it has been very stressful. She said the extra pay was welcome considering the high cost of living in Southern California, and as a validation of her sacrifices in going to work. Um, but only days after the additional money started flowing to Ayala and her colleagues, supervisors told the staff last week that Kroger was shutting down the store because of the hero pay requirement. Kroger also said it was closing a second store in the Long Beach area. The employees' union said it had not been told whether Kroger would move the workers to other locations. Kroger is sending a message. More than anything else, said Andrea Zindler, who is president of the Local 324, the United Food and Commercial Workers, which represents about 160 employees at two of the stores. They are trying to intimidate workers in the community. If you pass these types of ordinances, there will be consequences. Kroger operates about 2,750 stores, and it has attracted particular attention because it pursued stock buybacks last year and because its chief executive, Rodney McMullen, had earned more than $20 million in 2019. The median compensation of a Kroger employee that year was $26,790, or a ratio of 789 to 1, according to company filings. In 2020 alone, Kroger has invested well over $1.3 billion to safeguard and reward the associates and committed nearly $1 billion to secure pensions for tens of thousands of associates across the country. The company said in a statement that this is in addition to the more than $800 million the company will have invested in associate wage increases from 2018 to 2020, which are not just one-time awards but lasting wage increases. On Friday, the company also said it would provide $100 to all workers who received the coronavirus vaccine. Lisa Harris, who's a cashier at Kroger in Mechanicsville, Virginia, said that the company had not given extra compensation to employees since it ended its $2 per hour hero pay back in May. It occasionally gives workers $100 to spend on groceries, but things are otherwise business as usual, she said. Meanwhile, she said colleagues are signing cards for one another when relatives die from the COVID-19, and they're dealing with workers in the busy store where customers sometimes refuse to wear masks. She says, we've had people quit. We've had verbal altercations between associates because they're too stressed, said Harris, who's 32, a member of her local UFCW. It's rough to get up the courage, and which is what it takes to walk in that door each day. Seattle recently enacted a hero pay requirement of $4 an hour, which an industry group warned could prompt the smaller grocery chains to cut back on donations and to food banks and charities or reduce store hours because it was eating into the thin profits margin. They care so much about the communities and their employees, said Tammy Hetrick, who's the chief executive of the Washington Food Industry Association. Whatever they have to do is going to be such a difficult decision for them. The wage mandate is happening in other cities. On Tuesday, the Los Angeles City Council voted to move forward with the $5 an hour requirement. Some grocery chains have made a choice to pay their workers more. Trader Joe's increased its pandemic hazard pay to $4 an hour from $2, starting last week nationwide. The Stockwell of Cash Saver said the chain gave workers 2 months of hazard pay early in the pandemic and an end-of-the-year bonus that amounted to about $1,200 for full-time employees and several $100s for part-time staff. HAC, the Oklahoma company that owns Cash Saver and Homeland, is an employee-owned. Its chief executive, Mark Jones, said the initial hero pay last year was a reflection of the surge of people in our stores, and when that surge died down, it seemed like the appropriate time to end it. It was a huge expense for the company, he said, which has about 80 stores and about 3,400 employees, and it's in competition with Walmart. Even with a better year than usual, groceries are a particular low profit business. Jones said until March, he said it was a big question of whether the local grocery store would even survive and if everybody was going to go online. Stockwell says she was more concerned about the vaccine delay for grocery workers, particularly given that her colleagues tended to work every hour they could at a minimum wage. Most of the employees up front, they barely have high school diplomas, said Stockwell, whose local unit of the UFCW has been trying to get Oklahoma officials to get grocery staff on the priority list for vaccinations, and they want to do anything they can to keep food and electricity on that at their home. She added, "We are menial labor people that don't require bachelor's or master's degrees, but we're still people." At least 13 states have made some grocery store workers eligible for the COVID-19 vaccination, and at least some counties. They are Alabama, Arizona, California, Delaware, Illinois, Kansas, Kentucky, Maryland, Nebraska, New York, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Wyoming. And Jones said that he had shared the workers' frustration over vaccines that he said was started. That Oklahoma had placed grocery workers in the same vaccination phase as the workers at golf courses and photography studios. Society in general is given a very mixed message, celebrating the grocery workers as essential early in the pandemic, and now, less than a year later, they're putting grocery workers at the end of the queue. He said. But basically, they should return that hazard pay. That should have never gone away.